Start. Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm James Patterson, and I'm a Senior Marketing Coordinator at Perficient. I'm excited to be moderating today's webinar, which is extremely pertinent right now, Microsoft Teams Governance and Automation. The audio for today's conference should be coming through your computer speakers. Please ensure your speakers are turned on and the volume up. If you're experiencing any issues with the audio, try refreshing, reloading your browser, or unplugging and replugging in your headset. We are recording today, and we will email you with information how to access this recording after the session. Time permitting, which we should have, we will also answer questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to put those in the chat box. Speaking today will be Chris Barber and Joel Olison. They are respective employees of Perficient in our modern work practice. Joel is a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP, and also Director within the practice. Chris is a Solution Architect within our modern work practice, and they will be going through today, speaking through governance and automation on Microsoft Teams, and also showing a demo or two. Joel, I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right, thanks a lot, James. It's great to be here with everyone. It's exciting. I think Microsoft Teams has just it's really exploded with COVID, especially. I mean, it's incredible every time we hear new numbers from Microsoft, how it's doubling or quadrupling even just like over the course of just a few months. Very excited about to be here with you. As we said, Perficient's hosting the webinar today. We're both employees of Perficient. Perficient is in over 25 plus global locations, $500 million in revenue last year. In addition to Chris and I, we have about 4,500 colleagues, and we are publicly traded on the NASDAQ. The modern productivity practice, our modern work practice at Perficient, has actually been going for quite a while. In fact, over the last dozen years or so, we've been Partner of the Year most years and work very closely with Microsoft. In fact, we are a national service provider for the Microsoft services, and we've moved over 1 million customers to the cloud, or 1 million seats plus to the cloud across SharePoint, Exchange, and so on. In fact, 5 million, if I'm looking there. In fact, very deep in Microsoft 365, and we've got a number of different kind of practices that go on across Azure, as well as Dynamics, and what you're hearing today with modern productivity. And like I mentioned, there's over 26 locations in North America, but we also have a number of global delivery centers across the globe. So today's topic, we're going to be really drilling in on governance, but we want to make sure before we do that you really understand Teams is a platform. So we're going to start off talking about Teams as a platform, talking about the governance aspects of that, and how you really want to set up your environment for success. We want to then dig into some tools, talk about Teams as an application platform, and dig into the COE starter kit. And then essentially we want to talk about the Graph API as well. And we've got a couple cool demos for you as well. So let's dig into Teams as a platform. Now, one of the first things that anybody who's approaching Microsoft Teams should understand is, even though we talk about Skype to Teams as a migration, Teams has so much more. In fact, I love this iceberg analogy of, when you look at something, there's what you see above the water, and then there's what's below the water. With Skype, it's pretty much what you see is what you get. It's calling, chats, and meetings. And sure, there's a lot of companies who've done some pretty cool callings types of scenarios with Skype, but for the most part, it is what it is. With Teams, yeah, you have the calling, chats, and meetings, which is why we talk about migration from Skype to Teams. But there is so much more that's kind of this hidden collaboration functionality that's super rich. When you talk about things like storage, it's not just Teams or SharePoint and OneDrive that you got below this, behind the scenes. It could be Citrix, it could be Google, it could be Box, Dropbox. There's all sorts of really cool options in terms of integration with files and file systems. You got the application platform aspects of this, where you can actually build rich applications. In fact, my preference these days is anything I'm building in Power Platform or anything in the enterprise, I absolutely want that to be front-ended by Teams. Teams makes it so much easier to consume applications we build in the enterprise, but even off-the-shelf applications. And my ability to organize my my data and my team with tabs and channels. We've got the connectors, hundreds of connectors, and when you start talking about building applications, hundreds more that you can do with Power Automate and Power Apps, and the bots that you can actually do, whether it's virtual agents or using the bot SDK. There's a very rich integration with bots, as well as being able to build your own or use the off-the-shelf ones, or whether it's third-party tools or things you've homegrown built inside your organization as well. Now, as I kind of approach Teams and look at it, a lot of people, when they first approach Microsoft 365, they think, oh man, there's all these apps, and they get overwhelmed. They say, oh, there's SharePoint and Stream and Planner and Teams and Yammer and all these apps. Well, I do believe the best way to consume Microsoft 365 is actually to decide what is your front end. What is that interface that your users are going to use? And traditionally, we've been using SharePoint as that interface, where we'll plug in, Yammer parts, or we'll plug in things from email and so on, as an example, even plugging in stream videos and that kind of thing. Well, let me tell you, the latest generation of the improvements to Teams has been fantastic as this convergence of communication and collaboration, where being able to pull in the plans and the teams and the streams and the files and the conversations and the chats and calls and meetings, like Teams is this powerful hub for work, but it's also an application platform. So the ability to reduce context switching, the ability to have kind of that single tool to kind of unite all these experiences is super, super powerful. And even the idea of using SharePoint and OneDrive, Teams actually simplifies when to use what, because you don't have to worry about it. If I'm sharing a file one-on-one with somebody, it shares it from my OneDrive. If I'm sharing it with my team, it automatically stores it in SharePoint. It's fantastic from that perspective. And it doesn't stop there. Integration with Dynamics, you're building applications with Azure, and we'll talk a lot more about this, but the Power Apps and Power Automate, all these, the whole entire Power Platform, and our ability to integrate with CDS portals or connecting with data on the back end, so much that you can actually do, and even yet to come. You talk about Project Cortex and the AI builder for building more with automation. There's so much more that's even coming. When you're wondering where Microsoft's going, it is actually this concept of kind of this Teams first world, and Teams as an application platform with all of the other services being kind of plugged in there. And in fact, you could say that some people approach this and say, I've got so many clouds, I've got all my SaaS apps and different parts of the business, whether it's the solution you're using for productivity, the solution you're using for your CRM, whatever your HR is using, or even finance and payroll. You end up with all these different clouds. But the cool thing here is this idea that we can bring in payroll, HR, CRM, Microsoft, and whether it's Dynamics or Salesforce. And I understand you may not use ServiceNow, but this idea of being able to pull all these SaaS apps into a single interface for a number of different roles. whether it's the executive, information workers, and first line workers. And it's absolutely this mobile first, cloud first kind of experience where things are designed to be consumed in a very simplified way and in a powerful way as well. So we've actually got something here to help simplify your life a little bit. When we talk about teams, there's a lot of different things going on, and I don't mean to overwhelm you too quickly, but we definitely have people on the line here today who have been either setting it up or running it for a while. And before we even dive into this, I'm actually going to kick off a poll. We want to know where you're at in your deployment of Teams. So I'm going to be launching a poll, and you should start seeing that now. There may be some who, like the iceberg, you're in the middle of migrating from Skype to Teams. There may be some who are just getting started with Teams. There may be some who are actually doing applications with it, and that's what we mean by Teams as a platform. And then there may be those who are actually now looking at a much more mature Teams environment where it is the application for your business, and you're kind of driving toward that. And I appreciate the voting. I'm actually going to share that with everybody. Closing the poll now and sharing those results. And you can see we've actually got a pretty good strata across all of it, but it looks like most people, about half the people on here, are getting started with Teams. And I'm excited to have, you know, so many people. In fact, it's great to see 20% of people are actually seeing this in a mature way as well, with 10% that are still migrating from Skype to Teams. And there are absolutely a lot of people who may be a little bit confused about that trying to get people off of Skype and into Teams. It can be quite the challenge, but sooner the better for sure. You know, trying to helping people in their adoption of Teams and getting things moved over. It ends up being very confusing for end users when they've got both. So while we're in here, let me just talk through this. Some of what you'll notice is there's kind of three major admin interfaces for Teams. And that's a little bit confusing, but let me explain this. First off, you've got these Azure AD set of tools where you can manage your group creation, solidify some of the standards. You've got the group classification, and we're really trying to discuss the strategy of a unified labeling strategy that includes a classification of your teams so that things kind of continue to percolate through those teams. If you understand how they're classified, the data that's in those teams should also be classified with a common label. But you may have other label strategies as well. You got your membership, and absolutely you can do dynamic membership of teams where it's based on attributes in Active Directory. You've got your group templates, and groups are something that does float across all of M365 as well. You've got your guest access where you can kind of control who has access, whether it's internal or external, being able to have external guests. You've got group expiration, the recovery, as well as even access review. And I'm not going to go through all of these in that detail, but basically you've got your team or Skype admin tools as well, depending on what you're using for your calling plans and meetings and so on. But inside of this admin center, you can get your, like as an example, your calling dashboards and things like that. When you're planning your Skype to Teams migration, the migration set of things in terms of coexistence is managed in this Teams in this admin interface as well. And then we have this third major section of sets of compliance and governance set of tools here that are in the Security Compliance Center. So the Compliance Center is where we would manage DLP, our data loss prevention. whether it's for files or chat. There's the new communications compliance. There's the information barriers, advanced threat protection, so being able to manage who can log in from where. There's a lot of really cool options here, but let me actually simplify this for you to kind of help you understand. There's actually something that at first glance you may not necessarily understand, which is a lot of the coolest features in terms of managing governance around teams and provisioning especially is actually based on Azure P1. So I understand that's a little bit confusing as to, why would Microsoft be requiring Azure P1? Well, it had a lot to do with when they built those sets of features. So they ended up being enhanced features based on them coming later and being delivered through Azure AD. A lot of the management of these sets of features. Now as well, even from a compliance perspective, there was a lot of later investments as well to kind of help things get to the end of the row, where DLP chat, the information barriers. Now, information barriers is as an example to say this department, finance, or even R&D shouldn't be able to talk to finance. Being able to set up those kinds of information barriers is a premium as well through the E5. And advanced threat protection, which is an advanced security feature as well, is part of E5. Now, I'm actually going to hand the things over to Chris to show us some stuff that he's built for customers who don't necessarily have some of those enhanced features. We had a customer even early on who was asking us they wanted to manage the provisioning, well, let me hand these things over to Chris. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Hey, everybody. So early on, there wasn't a lot of movement to teams, and there wasn't a lot of ways to manage the creation of teams outside of going directly through IT or service tickets, whatever the case may be within your organization. So one of the things that we've gone ahead and done for some of these, and if you've seen kind of previous sessions that Joel or I have done, we've kind of covered this topic, but we've integrated the Power Platform with SharePoint and Teams to create an automated process that allows for users to request a team, allow them to choose the parts that they'd like to clone or bring over, name it, determine what visibility they may need. So if this is going to be a public team or a private team, and then associate that with a base template of the team. So if it's something that has multiple channels, if it has pinned apps, if it has all of those types of things. So let's go ahead and dive into the demo. So we have our SharePoint list here that has some basic fields. The first field is going to be the title. So this is your title of your team that you're going to be creating. The next is going to be the description. So this would appear within the Teams window once the team's created. Your mail nickname. Next is going to be parts to clone. So this is where you get to pick and choose the pieces that you'd like to mix and match to make that team. Next is that visibility. So is this a public team where everybody can see and join and request, or is this a private team where the selection of users is going to be limited? We have a status column to show us where it's at in the process. So is this a new request? Is this something that's been completed, denied, or maybe pending approval? And then last is the type of template. So for mine, I have two types that are built in here. One is going to be a more restrictive template, and one is going to be open. So we'll go ahead and open this up. And this is just a basic SharePoint list form. So we would fill this in just as it is here. And I can pick and choose the pieces that I like by just deleting the text out of it. It's going to automatically use Power Automate in the background to determine what I've placed in there and what needs to be applied. Next, we'll select the drop down for visibility, select public or private. We'll go ahead and make this public. And then by default, I have the status field here This is going to get updated as it goes through our flow. So as the checkpoints occur within the natural process of going from an end user to an IT department for approval, that approval being granted or denied, and then processing back to the user, that's going to be there. And then the template type, so restricted or open. So let's go ahead and dive into the workflow behind the scenes. So if we look at this, we have our trigger action, which is when an item is created, and this is going to point to our SharePoint list that we just reviewed. Next, I like in my Power Automate and flows to have a comment section like you would in regular HTML or code that kind of tells us what the purpose is for this. So the goal is to automate and demonstrate the approval process for Teams creation. On this next one, as soon as the request has been processed and submitted by the user, what we want to do is we want to update that SharePoint list, right? We want to tell them the status has changed to pending approval so that they're not wondering where it is in the process and they have a visual to put to the request. The next thing that comes up is start and wait for an approval. So this is going to, on submission, send an email to the appropriate personnel, asking them if it is okay for this team to be generated. If it is, we'll move forward. And if it's not, we'll go ahead and do a couple things. So if it's denied by the IT department, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to update the status to denied. And the second thing is we'll send an email notifying the submitter of that denial. Maybe placing some notes in there, hey, there's already a team for this. Let's provide some direction to them on that topic. Or if it's approved, we'll do the same thing. So we'll send them an email letting them know that it's been approved. We'll update the status for the approval.
So let me even stop you there for a second, Chris.
Yeah.
I absolutely have been in some customers where they're like, we want HR to review all the names that come through, or we want HR to look at it. So I often see in the business there's some multiple kind of routing that happens where they want IT to provision it, but they won't, before IT provisions it, they want HR to look at it to make sure that there's nothing strange about it or odd. And I know that as well, even with that P1 license, you can actually have some of those reserved names. So I can imagine even in Power Automate, you could, check names, or you could have it go to HR versus IT. It really gives you all sorts of different kind of cool options to validate here.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, for the example you were talking about with HR, maybe taking a first pass before it even gets to IT, what we would do in that case is basically move the workflow approval, right? Or have a duplicate of this action. So let's go ahead and send this to HR first, right? Before it goes to anybody else, let's make sure that it meets the HR policies on that side. If it's approved, move that forward to the IT department. Then they can take a look and make sure that it's okay. There's no duplications, there's no conflicts, any of those pieces. And then as far as the naming piece, I mean, that's pretty simple, right? So if we have conditions already in here, like we do for, what type of template is chosen and what are we using, we would just add additional conditions. Say, does name contain this word? Maybe it's profanity. Maybe it's something specific to HR policy. And we exclude that from being created. We send the denial, or vice versa. If it's approved, then we can process it that way. And then
what I like about this example is it shows the extensibility of Teams here, our ability to kind of capture that provisioning process and add whatever kind of business rules we want into it.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect starter example to get you going, right? So there's this base one with SharePoint. Everybody's familiar with it. It's something we've all kind of grown accustomed to over the last 7 years, 10 years. And then the demo that we'll show later on kind of builds on this into the Power Platform, right? So this one has the Graph API interactions. It has the connectors to Outlook and Flow and the SharePoint list and other pieces, while it still maintains its simplicity from a user standpoint of, I submit this thing, I see the updates that occur on my list, so I know where it's at in each portion of the process. And then I get an email back saying, yes, it's been completed, or it hasn't. So just going back to the workflow real quick. So after request has been approved, we determine what kind of team has been requested, right? So is this a restrictive team with different policies, or is this an open team that we don't need to apply some of those things to? Based on the requirement, we'll go ahead and use a Graph API connector to go ahead and build that team. And then we'll send an email to the original submitter letting them know that it's been completed. And at the end, we'll obviously update the workflow, letting them know and updating the status of that workflow, showing as completed.
You know what I like as well about this part of it is not all teams are created equal, and even the settings and configuration could be different. Like in some companies, they want to use teams for, you know, there's a huge difference between the sensitive teams where this is super secret stuff, we want everything encrypted, we want to, you know, be super conservative about who gets access to it, and even have processes around membership and all that kind of jazz, with maybe even reviews. Then you've got extranet types where you may be wanting to share data with partners and provisioning related to external users, but you don't necessarily want to mix the ability to do the external sharing on your most sensitive sites. So that ability to kind of handle things on the front end in terms of what's allowed and the various policies that may be applied, being able to do this right up front allows you to essentially classify the different types of teams that you're creating, and really it goes downstream as well. We're talking connected SharePoint sites or connected planner and plans, and you can use that ability that on provisioning build out all these different containers that are all pulled up through the team, added to the tabs automatically, and all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Were there any questions on this piece before we move forward with hopping back into the deck?
I think you're good to go. I'll watch the Q&A.
All right, perfect.
Feel free to pull up the deck if you'd like.
Yep.
There you go.
All right, so coming right off of the demo we just had, where we're using templates and team templates essentially to help with the provisioning process, right? Standardizing the deployment of teams, you know, whether you're in a environment that is transitioning currently from Skype, or you're in the process of just starting fresh, or maybe you're, you know, during COVID, you're forced to adopt and push out. And now we want to structure these and have some governance around this. So that's where these templates and these app templates come in from Microsoft. It allows you to have these pre-built templates that exist out there that have pre-installed channels, apps, pinned teams, specific to healthcare, maybe retail or educational as well. Joel, did you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick say, if you're looking to see what is possible with doing templates inside of Teams, my favorite one to go and dig into is the HR support bot. And there's some HR related cool kind of workflows and work streams with Power Automate. It shows the idea of what it would look like from end to end if you were to build out a template for Microsoft Teams. Really kind of cool example of what it would look like from end to end.
Great. All right, so moving into tools for Teams as an application platform.
And I think before we even jump into your ability to do all that Power Automate work, Microsoft just made an announcement a couple, I think it's definitely been over a month now, but SharePoint 2010 workflows, absolutely end of life. In fact, you may notice that August 1st, Microsoft dropped the hammer. Any new tenants, 2010 workflows are blocked. And in fact, November 1st coming up, if you have existing tenants, 2010 workflow is going to be blocked on existing tenants. So if you, hopefully you're aware of the news, it's more of a reminder, but it's a great time to be doing some major cleanup. If you need help there, let us know. But definitely make sure you do some cleanup as it's related to SharePoint Designer, InfoPath, all those things. You really should be using Power Platform. Yeah, one last thing here. When I think about the Power Platform and how Microsoft has designed these tools, they've really designed it to empower the business. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a business user to use it, but they've tried to make it such that these are no code, low code. You just saw how Chris had built a workflow using the UI, right in the browser. He was able to build this really cool work stream and this flow, this Power Automate flow. That idea of the business being able to do that. Now, it's not to say that the IT can't. In fact, IT is still likely to be the bulk party who's building these things. But even this maker group, you've got these people who are embedded in the business who are now essentially building applications. And again, Gartner has estimated as much as 65% of all app dev will actually be done and built by the business. So this business unit IT, low code, no code, is absolutely a revolution that's going on inside of businesses. And I think that as it relates to governance, that's one of the reasons why we need to set up our environments in such a way that we can empower the business, but not let it go crazy. It's about how we manage it. And I think that's how we're going to be kind of talking through this in the next few slides.
Yeah, so I mean, to Joel's point, right? Organizations have this broad set of technical skills, but maybe those skills aren't just in the IT department. If we're talking traditional development with C#, Objective-C, .NET, CSS, all of those things, that's actually a small percentage of the overall skills that your organization might have. So if we're looking into the marketing team, right, they might have skill sets that translate directly into some of the Power Platform tool sets and teams because they have the visuals, they have the workflows, they have the background details on departments and groups. While your accounts payable or your finance department has that in-depth knowledge of macros, Excel, formulas that could help with the Power BI, the Power Automate, all of those aspects. And when you put those together, that makes for an effective business, right? You come up with ideas with people that actually understand the true business that you're in and the organization. So
absolutely. In fact, I've seen people who are wizards at Excel, and they make some of the coolest Power Apps that I've ever seen. It's really amazing what people can do with experiences they've been given in these other applications.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the other thing is when we talk about governance and we talk about restrictions, is now that we're opening things up and we have this maker mentality and enabling users to do all these things, we want to make sure that we also reduce the risk for shadow IT. And how do we do that? I mean, obviously there's controls and DLP and things that we need to put in place, but one of the recent reports showed that 33% of the reasons that shadow IT even exists is because the business knowledge of the organization just doesn't exist within IT. They might know overall what we do and how the business works, but they don't know the inner workings. And so they go out and find an application that might do what they need it to, but that doesn't fall under the compliance of an IT or go through the due diligence and process. So if we involve them at the front and we allow them to help with some of the build of these systems and these workflows and triggers and all of these other things via hackathons or polls and ideas from the staff, you can engage your users to ensure that they'll be on board and adopt this going forward.
I would absolutely agree that this idea of Teams as a platform, when you start looking at it as kind of layers of a cake, where you've got your productivity apps, those are the things that are plugged right in. You've got what we'd even call third-party applications like Trello and Rike and ADP, these kinds of tools that, in addition to the Microsoft apps, but they're actually built by those companies for plugging right into Microsoft Teams. And then we've got this kind of deeper layer where, building applications with the Power Platform, building a Power App, publishing it in Teams, or say building out a Power BI dashboard, or like the Power Automate you saw that Chris was showing, that ability to be able to kind of build these work streams or workflows, and being able to build your own chatbot, kind of cool stuff. And on the back end, all those business applications, LOB integration with all the connectors and building, you saw some of those app templates that you can build, process automation, business intelligence, building out rich apps. It's like Teams really pulls this whole thing together with Teams as a platform, and this is just where it starts.
Yes. So if we talk about Teams as a platform, right? So a lot of what we're seeing is this citizen developer, where we're enabling users to be able to use UI-based tools to kind of build things out. But maybe you have true developers that are currently doing these things in SharePoint or in custom apps or custom app dev. So what Microsoft's kind of done over the last year and a half, as Teams has evolved and the adoption has gone up, is they've introduced these tool sets, right? So Teams App Studio or the Visual Studio expansion with VS Code, integration with SPFX for the SharePoint framework, all of these things that we're familiar with and we've gained the skill sets over the last couple of years developing, we don't have to throw those away anymore. Those carry over into the Teams as a platform strategy, and we can utilize our team members to develop on, right? So we create Teams as the hub for our central workplace for the staff with existing skill sets narrowed down to one central place. Joel, did you have anything else that you wanted to kind of discuss on this one?
No, I think the key thing here is for people to understand the Teams absolutely is true application development, as well as low code, no code, the Power Platform. But if you want to go to town with Visual Studio, absolutely you can do that. And there's all sorts of integration for building your own connectors, building your own application templates, even say the Fluid framework, the SharePoint framework. These things are now first-party experiences right inside of Teams. So don't discount what you can actually build inside of Teams. It's super rich.
Great. So if we go back to Joel's earlier slide about how Teams is so much more than a rebranded Skype and chat, right? There's things underneath that iceberg. It's a platform for development. It's how we integrate external apps. We can add websites as tabs. We have a single place for collaboration. So when we're looking to define these use cases for Teams, it's not a hard thing to do, but it does take some foresight and some thought leadership to make sure that we have this larger vision in front of us of where the platform can take the organization. So first, let's be creative in the ways that we can integrate the current systems into Teams to help drive that value. Maybe that's by creating flows for potential leads from clients that creates an adaptive card, or maybe it posts a message within a channel, which then in turn drives the sales team to go explore those new opportunities. I mean, there's a number of ways that you can do this to attract the attention of the staff, right? We've already seen one where we can attract the staff to create their own team, but following that governance policy of going through HR, going through IT before it even gets provisioned. Next, let's utilize the platform to bring apps directly into Teams, whether that's tabs, SPFX, Visual Studio, side loading, or any other means. This helps to prevent the need to bounce between systems, reduces your overall efficiency, and helps kind of bring it all into one place. Joel, I know you have a ton of insight on context switching. Do you want to share some of that here?
Yeah. You know, I think that when we go back to kind of how Windows itself has evolved, where Windows was this operating system and you had the desktop with all the icons, think of Teams as that new interface, where I've even heard a lot of people say Teams is this operating system of the cloud. Now, I'm sure that probably is a little bit overstated, but when you talk about Teams as being this interface for your applications, it's very much like our operating system where we integrate it with the cloud, and it's the UI that we use to consume it. This is what modern teamwork looks like. When you start looking even at the Teams roadmap, where tasks, that's something that's huge. You know, our ability to manage our tasks, that's coming next. And you know, I've even seen some community projects like Teams Home, this ability to have kind of the home experience right on my mobile device, where I can plug in whatever apps I want right into my mobile device, into kind of a first party experience right inside the browser. And I just get really excited about this idea of the frontline workers being able to do so much stuff that's in the business without even having to leave the Teams interface. And you know, that may be kind of a wild idea, but it's really growing on me. I'm finding I'm actually spending more time in Teams than I do in Outlook. And the teams that I work with as well are kind of getting excited about that idea as well, reducing the context switching, allowing me to do more inside this interface. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if we're reimagining the employee experience through Teams, the last thing is we want to make sure we integrate those line of business apps, the workflows, the collaboration tool sets into that one place, so that the Microsoft vision of having a central workspace is achieved, right? So if we can create it as the 90% of a person's day, and they only have to do context switching for that other 10%, I mean, think of how much more productive that person can become, right? Instead of finding that link that you sent via email, you know, that can be attached as a part of a wiki, or it can be a post in Teams, right? So Karen doesn't have to go looking through that new time clock link through her email. That's already posted. Everybody can go out and grab that, and the resistance gets reduced, adoption gets increased, and the case for change kind of makes itself.
It's huge. You know, I think about how many company solutions people put behind VPNs, or they put it behind, you know, you got your Oracle interface, your ServiceNow interface, your Workday interface, and it's jarring for people who are trying to get their work done, jumping from tool to tool to tool, where, you know, being able to have these as work streams with a common experience, and being able to plug those tools in when you need to. But it's a great vision, I think. Now, I think that this kind of might bring us back a little bit, but this idea of what is governance? Governance is, how do we wrap our arms around this product? You know, we've talked about the platform, and we talked, you know, even looked at provisioning. There's a number of key areas in the product that if you can get figure out the answers to some key questions, you're going to have so much better of a time managing this solution. So as an example, we actually start off with the provisioning question. Who can create it? Do you want to let everybody do it? That's the default. So if you don't want to, and you want to manage it by group, you can. You can actually create a group that can have provisioning rights, but that does require P1, Azure P1. Standardization, or do you want to block words? whether it's profanity or reserved words like the company name. You don't want people doing official things with their team name. And things like sharing, external sharing. You can do archiving and expiration, policies. We talked about the app templates, and even those various management interfaces. So these are just some ideas to help you kind of wrap your head around this. We can move on to the next thing. And just real quick, I talked a little about labeling and classification. There's kind of three key areas in the labeling. There's sensitivity labels, there's retention labels, and then absolutely don't forget the data loss prevention. These things are off by default. You actually have to enable them. You need to figure out what your labels are going to be. I do like even these Microsoft ones that you can kind of see on the screen there, where you can do your general or confidential or highly confidential, being able to just get some group classification set up from the beginning, just to get started. Let's go on the next one. So there is a COE starter kit that Microsoft has built that can help you get started in governance and being able to get your arms around what's happening in the environment. I'm going to have you go to the next slide. Here's a quick screenshot of what it looks like. You can see there's this concept of environments. So instead of having separate tenants for dev and test and so on, you can actually manage the environments in such a way that you can say these are in dev environment for the finance team, or dev environment for the build for Asia. So basically you can build out where these apps are in different environments. And these environments, you can see who are the top makers in these environments. And you can see here are the people who are making these apps and where they're located and so on. So you get a really nice overview of what's happening across Power Apps and Flow, your connectors, looking at the people, building a community around the environment. Let's go on the next thing.
Yeah, can I add one thing real quick, Joel? So
Sure.
I think if your organization is adopting the Power Platform and we're going through and enabling these people, a good thing for some of the management and managers to do is to go in here and see who's actually doing this stuff, right? So it might be that you have personnel that's outside of IT that has these ideas and knows those macros and is playing around with some stuff. You know, include them in some of the conversations. Ask them if they want to sit in a webinar or a training session and get them involved in the process.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like building your community around the people who are actually doing these things. You know, you want to work with your makers, and that's actually what governance really is. It's like, it's not just shutting people down. In fact, that's not what you should be doing. It's how do you find the guardrails to help them be successful? And here's some quick examples of what that looks like from the end user interface. When you start using the COE starter kit, you can say, hey, you need to update your app to stay compliant. You can basically build compliance rules, or you can even say, these are the connectors we've approved. So if somebody tries to use connectors that are not approved, you can actually tell them, hey, this is not an approved connector. Love the idea of archiving to enforce ownership and lifecycle. You want people to attest that these are still being used, so that lifecycle, and even out of the box, you do have some of the ability to do some archiving and kind of recovering when a team gets deleted. It's almost like a recycle bin experience for these. But with the starter kit, you actually get a lot more, where you can enforce ownership and manage ownership, and being able to get the visibility and transparency around the applications that are being created. So these are things that can really help you get your arms around and have better governance of your environment. Let's go on next.
All right, so by now, hopefully, everybody has heard of the Graph API. If you haven't, so the Graph API is this single endpoint that Microsoft provided. What it does, it reaches out and can touch almost anything within the Microsoft stack. So if we're talking about, you know, Windows 10 devices or Azure or bots, Power Automates, Teams, all of those pieces, this is your one-stop shop that you can get in, get familiar with the data, and then use that to automate business processes. So my favorite piece of Graph and the tool sets that Microsoft has put out is the Graph Explorer. So if you're not a developer, you haven't been working with this stuff for a long time, it's sometimes scary to hop in and do something new. What this Graph Explorer does is it's a website that's provided by Microsoft. It gives you all of the sample code and API calls that are associated with these things and the actions that you can take in a web UI that's easily accessible to you. So I can go ahead in the screenshot here that we're looking at, click on a getting started to get my profile, and it's going to pull back, my telephone number, my email, my address, all of that information that's stored under my account, and bring that back to me in a JSON format. So if we take this in the context of what we were doing earlier with the SharePoint list and automating that through Power Automate, we can run the call for the Graph API with Power Automate, return it, parse it, and then run an action against it, right? So if we have a self-service list that somebody can come in and update their cell phone number or their account information, and that goes out to Graph, retrieves it, we can have that then update that information as a self-service portal that no longer has to go to the service desk or no longer has to go through a manager or an HR system. That could, or it could go and kind of work in tandem with it. So in the context of what we're talking about for this first demo and also this second one, what we'll be looking at here is the Graph API clone a team action. So what this does, it allows you to create a new team based on a existing team and strip away parts that you don't want. So you can pick and choose the pieces that you'd like to have. So maybe I want the channels and the members, but I don't want the tabs, or maybe I want to pull over only the settings and the tabs themselves. You can kind of pick and choose and drive the value that you want to create this standard when you're deploying teams. So if you already have teams and you're trying to reel it back in now that COVID is going and everybody's been forced to adopt so much, you can use this to go ahead and process those requests of teams being generated by allowing them to create from a standard. So let's go ahead and hop into a demo real quick.
We can see your screen. Looks good.
Perfect. All right, so what we've done here is in order to manage a team, I used to be a sysadmin. So if I'm out to lunch or if I'm away from my desk or I want to have this quick, easy way to do this, I've created a Power App to actually do some of that Teams administration. Using the Graph API, using Power Automate, and all those pieces kind of pulled together to create a central place where I can go and manage all of this. So very simple application, right? Teams administration. I have the list of actions that I can do here. So I'm going to go ahead and do clone a team. So in this, I'm going to put in some basic information about the team. I'll have the parts that I want to clone. So we're going to leave as is. I have my visibility. So is this public or private? And then I have the option to submit this and create that team. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Perfect. All right. So while this process is, what we can kind of look at is the ability for how quickly the Graph API can do something versus a user manually doing these things. So we've already seen that the new team has copied from my base team here. It's brought over the new channel. It's created the team and matched all of the settings for it. and the process is already complete. So at this point, I can have an email triggered stating out to the user, hey, your team was completed. We're good to go. Here's the link. Go ahead and add your members. One of the things that I will call out is there are two interesting tidbits about the Graph API with the clone a team action. The first is there is the ability to clone the tabs and the ability to clone the team. One thing is you'll notice that sometimes it is inconsistent, but they are working on getting a resolution, is the wiki will double. It does point back to the same place, so you'll just need to kind of remove it, or as a next step to that workflow of creating the team, you can set up a flow that goes ahead and removes it for you. The second thing is when I do have tabs that point out to external locations like a Power App or a website, what it's going to do is it's going to place the tab there with the same name and settings, but you'll have to come in and set up the tab for it. So two quick things just to call out. I know we're running short on time, so I'll kind of turn it back over to you, Joel.
Great. With that, if you want to go ahead and pull up the slides, I'm going to kick off this last poll, which is the which of the following could you use in assistance? Just wondering if you guys need any help, basically. So whether it's with Skype to Teams, or whether it's migration of the SharePoint workflows, or anything related to Power Platform or governance, adoption, any of those kinds of things. So feel free to let us know. And with that as well, if you've already voted, would be great to go ahead and push in any questions you've got, and we can leave this open while we're answering any questions for a little bit as we're getting a few more votes in.
Hey Joel, would you mind giving me that presenter or taking that back?
Yeah, no problem. I'm just gonna, I don't think I can do it while this is running. And I'm looking for a few more votes before I do that, but absolutely.
Perfect.
And James, do you want to go ahead and I think we had a couple questions.
Yeah, we've got a question here. So the question that says, do you have any recommendations on naming standards for teams?
Yeah, so naming standards, that is a good one, because I've definitely seen, even in the product, we have prefixed and postfix. And one of the things I've heard as well is like some customers who've used prefix over postfix, that when you do it as a prefix, often in the interface it becomes kind of an issue, because a lot of stuff they only show so many characters. So if you're doing prefixes, it can be a bit of a challenge because it can truncate what you can see, and it takes up some of those characters. So those of you who are trying to decide, do you use prefix versus postfix? The postfix can still allow you to say put your department names or abbreviations for locations or whatever you are deciding to do there. I know there's a number of standards people are using. If you do it the postfix, it can help in terms of UI. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? We had a recent client that had implemented Teams and had this naming strategy that had a prefix of a department number. And while the department number wasn't lengthy by any means, when we have these first line workers that are out in the field and they have the mobile application up, part of what they're seeing is just that prefix. They're not able to see the rest of the distinguishing factors of that channel name or maybe the team name even. So I would be really diligent about, even if you have to do a couple samples of in the UI, creating in a team and seeing what best fits for your organization. So have your regular name and then add the suffix to it, or add it as a prefix, and kind of work through it to make sure that it aligns with a user's ease of use. because kind of deciding something without viewing it and having that real life Q&A and feedback from a user is going to be a detriment to it at some times.
Yeah, and another great example is people who put really long team names in. What they may not realize is how often you're needing to use that team name. So you don't want them to be too long. So if you have part of your process is to review those names, you actually may want to encourage people to know about how many characters it should be. You know, if you're to kind of encouraging them what's a good practice as an example. And the other thing is absolutely you can do the reserved names or the the profanity and that kind of thing. I haven't seen too many people go crazy with profanity, but it's kind of a job limiting move, let's say. But I do think that HR review, it's some companies, they just feel like anytime a user can put something in that's going to be in a visible space, they want to have some kind of review. But for the most part, I don't think most companies do that. Any other questions?
I don't see any others in there. I know we're at time as well, everyone. We're a little bit over. So unless anyone has any others that they quickly want to enter, I think.
And I did see somebody asking about the recording. Absolutely, this was recorded and you will have access to the recording. If you're looking for the slide deck, I'll be publishing it on my SlideShare, but as well, anybody who registered will get a link to it as well.
Yes, it will also be published on the Perficient SlideShare as well. So you'll have access to both the recording and the slides. They'll be sent out probably early next week, I would say.
Yeah, and if you have any questions about the demo, you got Chris Barber's email there. If you're, you can see on here as well, we do have some offers related to Quick Start. Whether you're looking to get off of the old workflows or whether you're looking at Skype to Teams and trying to just finish off some of that stuff, we're happy to answer any questions. And again, thanks everybody for joining the webinar.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.